Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Lincoln Riley, D'Anton Lynn. This USC program had been extremely active in the transfer portal, particularly in that back end of the defense, completely revamping what this secondary is going to look like in 2024. An obvious position of concern for USC heading into 2024. Now you combine a ton of talent getting injected into this program with one of the better secondary coaches in D'Anton Lynn taking over this defense. The expectation is this secondary to look a lot different, especially with the personnel and coaching that we are going to see. Want to take a deep dive into the secondary, talk about what we are expecting from this group in 2024. Really excited to get into this one. If you guys have been listening the last couple of weeks as we've broken down pretty much individually these commitments, we're big fans of these players. Now we want to talk about how it all comes together for USC in 2024. Before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys. This has been a program that's been just a blast talking about the last couple of weeks, and the amount of support consistently shown from the USC fans is absolutely amazing. All the fight-ons in the comment section, you guys show a ton of love. Can't thank you guys enough for rocking with us. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. I'm going to give you the T-box here. USC new look secondary. How are we feeling here?
I mean, the obvious thing is they're going for extreme length in the cornerback room.
Yes,
and you kind of saw who D'Anton Lynn wanted to play with last year at UCLA, longer guys. I mean, John Humphrey obviously being one of the stalwarts on that defense. You go get a guy like DeCarlos Nicholson, both 6'3" or 6'2", 6'3", and both really, really versatile, which I think is another thing D'Anton Lynn's obviously looking for.
Yeah, versatile and physical. Those are the two descriptives that we've used to describe John Humphrey and DeCarlos Nicholson. One, I think the frame stands out. These are two guys that have long arms, physical frames. They want to put their hands on wide receivers. And the last 2 years under Alex Grinch, a lot of kind of shell zone coverage, not really being very aggressive with those cornerbacks. D'Anton Lynn's coming in, and not only are you going to see kind of a mismatch or a mix and match of coverages, you'll see zone, you'll see press man, but you're also going to see a little bit more of an aggressive nature. And I think D'Anton Lynn looked at this secondary and said, these are the kind of bodies that we need to be successful in the defense we want to run. If we're leaving our cornerbacks on islands and some press man coverage, we need cornerbacks that can handle that physicality, especially going to the Big Ten, putting hands on wide receivers, rerouting them at the line of scrimmage. And then when you want to drop back into a zone coverage, you have guys that have a ton of length, can get their hands in throwing windows. You see a type that's emerged for D'Anton Lynn in that cornerback room. We want athleticism, we want physicality, and we want length, and that's what they got with John Humphrey and DeCarlos Nicholson coming in here.
And I think that's like a kind of going to be a departure from exactly what you kind of said. When you watched the Alex Grinch defense, like, I mean, you go back to that Washington game, I feel like they played the same defense every time. Yes. They dropped everybody right up through the middle. They were hitting them with crossers. They kind of had like plays that just worked on command. That is Washington. You kind of look at what D'Anton Lynn likes to do. And in one game, I thought was like one of like probably his performance that he puts on his highlight reel, if you will, is that Washington State game. And you looked how confused he had Cam Ward in that Washington State offense that was buzzing up until that game, really. I mean, they had guys in throwing lanes consistently. They just had Cam Ward holding the ball, taking sacks. They really put some chaos into that defense. And you just didn't see that enough from USC last year. It felt like they were constantly on their heels. In D'Anton Lynn, I felt like when that defense was going at UCLA, they were really effective in confusing quarterbacks and putting some pressure on them and kind of putting them on the heels, not being on.
That's kind of, I think, the stark difference that you're going to see. I mean, for the secondary, but the defense as a whole is we're not going to play this bend but don't break and try not to give up the big play and just let you move the ball down the field. D'Anton Lynn going to be aggressive, going to ask his cornerbacks to be aggressive. And I think that's what you're most excited about. Now you have the personnel to match what D'Anton Lynn wants to do. You go back to USC and last year, pretty much the last 2 years, but specifically last year, like really soft shell coverages. Like we're going to give you stuff underneath and we're not going to even come up and tackle. Right? You take a look at some of the missed tackle percentages for USC last year. A guy like Damani Jackson, 17%. Max Williams, 20%. Bryson Shaw, 19%. Like they were giving up the stuff underneath and then not coming up and tackling. And that is a bad recipe for a defense. You look at a guy like John Humphrey or DeCarlos Nicholson. John Humphrey from the cornerback spot, an 8.1% missed tackle rate. That's less than a lot of top linebackers that are going to the NFL draft in 2024. And so you're getting guys that, one, are physical, they're athletic, and they're long, and they also can tackle. Now I want to take a look at this safety room because, again, what's the narrative? Versatility, physicality, and Kamari Ramsey and a guy like Achille Arnold certainly bringing that to USC as well.
I mean, that's another big thing is like kind of resetting that mentality in that back end, because last year it felt like it was good enough if you could show the athleticism they wanted to see or something to play that position. Maybe you could get by with it, but like you're kind of right. D'Anton Lynn and UCLA, they very much expected everyone to tackle. You saw how much Kamari Ramsey was expected to be up in the box, making tackles and run plays, blitzing off the edge, like doing those, being a little more versatile, being, again, less predictable, which is kind of what I'd always get to in terms of what UCLA did that I think USC didn't. Guys were able to play in a lot of different spots and excel in those. And USC, that was never the case.
And you talk about like versatility. I think the safeties really show that, right? You have two really good boundary cornerbacks. You're taking a look at these safeties. Both Kamari Ramsey and Achille Arnold took snaps from all over the field at their previous stops. I mean, Achille Arnold, 175 snaps in the box, 182 as a slot, 289 as that center field free safety. Kamari Ramsey, much of the same, 350 as a free safety, 131 in the slot, 84 in the box. Both of these safeties can do a lot of different things. And what you're talking about is D'Anton Lynn mixing up looks, giving the opposing offense and quarterback kind of different looks, different personnel packages. When you have safeties, two of them, and Achille Arnold and Kamari Ramsey, who can do all sorts of things, like that's how you can scheme up pressure, scheme up personnel packages. I think the versatility is massive. And again, going back to tackling,
for me, it wasn't just that they played those spots, but they played them all well. It's like, okay, you could line up a guy as a free safety and he just plays it poorly. Fine. That doesn't mean much, but you look at Ramsey and Arnold, they both really effective wherever they lined up. I thought both were really, really good in the box. And obviously both, you look at kind of the numbers both those defenses had, didn't give up a ton of big plays like USC. So both are very comfortable being able to play that, not even that double high, but that single high look and being pretty proficient and not giving up bombs or the plays you really can't have as a defense.
Both really good in coverage. I mean, Kamari Ramsey faced 23 targets, only gave up 11 catches. That's a 47% completion percentage when targeted. Achille Arnold, 35 targets, only 19 catches, 54% completion percentage. So you're getting two good. Kamari Ramsey, I might add, only a 6.3% missed tackle rate. I mean, John Humphrey, Kamari Ramsey, they were tackling in that D'Anton Lynn defense. Those numbers weren't happening with Alex Grinch this year.
And a big thing you need if you're going to play with a little bit of variety and a little bit of that ability to confuse quarterbacks and not make it look so easy and not have them always look so comfortable against your defense.
Got to be able to tackle in space. And all four of these guys are phenomenal tacklers, and they kind of, I think, fit what D'Anton Lynn wants to do in terms of versatility, the physicality of the cornerbacks. Now, the secondary we're looking at and saying – dynamite gets, right? I think you got four new starters in the secondary. Kamari Ramsey, John Humphrey, a guy like Achille Arnold, and DeCarlos Nicholson. Now, I want to look at another position that I think USC needs to address. That's the defensive line. And obviously, the big conversation is some of the big names. I mean, you want to just add depth to this group. And I saw this guy hit the transfer portal this morning, so about 7 hours ago, and I looked at him and I said, USC needs to get after him. And that's Nick Skirton coming over from Purdue. He's from Texas, and he just hit the portal this morning. This is a guy that was one of the best defensive linemen in the Big Ten. 6'4", 280 pounds. His former teammate Jack Sullivan came over to USC last year. You take a look at what Nick Skirton can do. Again, same thing, versatility. This is a guy that can play the edge, can play the three tech, and he's extremely good against the run. 25 run stops on the year. He had 10 sacks, 15 tackles for a loss. An elite pass rusher, 20% pass rush win rate with 28 quarterback hurries. You talk about, you feel good about that back end. Now you want to have some reinforcements on the defensive line. A guy like Nick Skirton who can do everything from a 3-tech to the 5-tech, I think would be a massive addition for this USC team.
In going off kind of that D-line look, if you think what UCLA had, they had big, heavy, like they had a couple guys, frankly, who could sit in the middle and kind of just be space eaters to an extent. And that is one thing I'm looking at USC. I would be really surprised if they don't kind of go address that as that big, heavy defensive tackle, because they have a lot of athleticism on that defensive line coming back, a lot of versatility. but I think D'Anton Lynn and this USC team, and I'm not saying they need to go get like some 4 or 5 star portal guy. It just needs a tough, physical, gritty defensive tackle in that middle.
That's my next guy. So I think I see Nick Skirton as a little bit more of a playmaker, right? 15 tackles for a loss, 10 sacks. Like, this dude gets behind the backfield, can play the edge position, can play the three.
And that was the one thing that went well kind of for USC last year. I thought their defensive line were able to make plays. They just at times really couldn't do it on the back end and deal with big plays. But
yeah, and I think there was an element of like an undisciplined defensive line. You know what I mean? So like they get penetration, like they get in the backfield, but a lot of times it's shooting gaps, being in the wrong gap, and kind of giving up those big chunk runs. And that's not how you can run a defense. So you're expecting that to be mitigated. Like it's one thing to have a negative play for 2 yards, but then shoot the gap again and give up a 10-yard run because you're in the wrong gap, and that running back's going free to the second level, and your linebackers weren't tackling for squat last year. This is the guy that you're describing, right? A guy that is not necessarily going to fill up the stat sheet like someone like Nick Skirton, but is going to be so solid on the inside of that defensive line. Again, moving to the Big Ten, you need these kind of bodies. 6'1", 325, absolute fire hydrant. And he's had 8.5 tackles for a loss, 6.5 sacks last year. But a guy like Jamari Caldwell coming from Houston is going to be that guy that all great defenses have, that are not necessarily getting the ESPN spotlight, but a guy that, I mean, keeping your linebackers free, taking on double teams, winning at the point of attack. It's not,
and that allows guys like Bear Alexander to go to work a little bit more. And you don't, again, like Bear Alexander is going to take his shots. He's going to try to make his plays, and frankly, he should be, because he's that type of talent. But you do have to pair that. I felt like everybody on USC's defensive line wanted to play that type of style. You need some guys who will play a little different, where they're very comfortable taking blocks on head to head, eating up
doing the dirty work that's not necessarily going to get the fan praise, but is going to get you a lot of applause in the meeting rooms in the weekdays, right? As hey, you took on that double team, let that linebacker come free and kind of fill that hole. A guy like Jamari Caldwell is going to do that. And you look at all the top defenses across the country. Michigan, I think, is a great example. I think Georgia's a great example. They have some guys that aren't necessarily going for 10 sacks and 15 TFLs, but are playing damn good football and allowing some of their teammates to go for 10 sacks, 15 TFLs. I think a guy like Jamari Caldwell would play that role for USC. And you look at that defense, the secondary, I love it. I think this secondary is going to be really good, especially under D'Anton Lynn. Now you're trying to address the trenches, getting a few more bodies to add to that depth and that physicality along the line of scrimmage. And you look at this defense, again, the biggest storyline, D'Anton Lynn, not Alex Grinch. You're feeling good about what this group is going to look like in 2024. Wanted to break down the secondary, talk about a few defensive line transfer portal targets the fellas like. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys again. The amount of support means a lot. We love doing this. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.